Because the Greeks believed that these gigantic megalithic constructions were constructed by the offspring of the gods, the one-eyed cyclopes. The term sons of God only and exclusively refers to angelic beings, to celestial beings. Then they procreate with these women, and the result is a race of giants. The book of Enoch was rediscovered in 1773 in Enoch, chapter 6, the first few verses, just like in Genesis. You have the passage from which the passage in Genesis is derived. It reads, "And it came to pass, when the children of men had multiplied, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the angels, the children of heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose wives from among the children of men, and beget us children."
Timothy Alberino goes on the Glenn Beck show and he gets pressed on the hidden biblical alien race. What is going on? Is this the Nephilim that he's talking about, the sons of God that he's talking about? Timothy Alberino is going to be getting right into it, explaining what exactly he means. So let's get right into it. Shout out to the Glenn Beck show. I will have the entire video in the description below. And guys, subscribe. I'm trying to hit 100,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I know we can do it with your help. So thank you so much for all the love and support. Let's get into it.
Well, when I was living in Peru, I had an opportunity I lived in Peru for 10 years. I had the opportunity to travel extensively around the country. And this is when I was first confronted with what are called megaliths. Megaliths are edifices, large edifices that are constructed with stones that are fitted together without the use of any kind of a bonding agent, so without the use of mortar. This is known in archaeology as Cyclopean architectures. And yes, they're referring to the Cyclopes of Greek mythology.
Wow.
Because the Greeks
the
believe...
one-eyed giants.
Precisely. Because the Greeks believe that these gigantic megalithic constructions that are found in Greece as well, throughout Greece, were constructed by the offspring of the gods, the one-eyed cyclopes, and that this knowledge of megalith building had come from the gods. And in Peru, you have some of the most exquisite Cyclopean architecture on planet Earth. If you go to Cusco, as many people have visited Cusco en route to Machu Picchu, you will see the walls of Sacsayhuaman, which are one of the most impressive megalithic sites on planet Earth. And these are just mammoth walls that are constructed with solid blocks of stone, some of them weighing in excess of 200 tons, fitted together so tightly, the joints are so tight you can't stick a butter knife between them. Wow. And in the case of Sacsayhuaman, these are polygonal megalithic stones, which means they have sort of a pillowed look to them, as if they were not entirely hard when they were fitted together. Imagine a bunch of imagine taking pieces of Play-Doh and squishing it together. That's what these walls look like, or clay. And they're magnificent. The walls of Sacsayhuaman are magnificent. And indeed, when the conquistadors arrived to Sacsayhuaman, and they beheld these magnificent megalithic walls, they concluded these could not have been made by human beings. They had to have been built by giants or demons or some supernatural power. Many people, in fact, almost everyone is familiar with the legendary Inca site of Machu Picchu. Well, the foundations of Machu Picchu are megalithic. And in the Quechua word for Machu Picchu is Ijampu. And Ijampu means, in Quechua, the abode of the gods. So the Inca themselves believed, and I think this is apparent, the Inca themselves believed that the megaliths were built by the gods, and that they, being the offspring of the gods, were the natural inheritors of the works of the gods. And so they re-inhabited and they rebuilt what they believed was the habitation of the gods. And you can find this, again, the megalithic constructions all over the earth, especially in Peru.
Right. So some of the stuff, like, for instance...
So I wonder, though, if millions of years from now, are people going to say, how in the world did they build those towers? Those people must be giants. If, the only way that could happen if they don't have the technology that we have today. That's the problem. Because we're always wondering, how in the world were they able to build all of these things without the technology that we have? That's what makes you really wonder. Not unless they had technology and then it got completely destroyed. It's crazy.
The stones around the Sphinx that are cut out perfectly, and then moved whole, and they don't know how they were cut out of the rock, out of the ground, right?
What's interesting is if you look at the temples around the Sphinx, yes, there are megalithic constructions in Egypt, and you see the very same cyclopean technique. The very same cyclopean technique as you see all over the earth.
Wow.
So when you look at the walls of Ollantaytambo in Peru, for example, and you see how they took a large block of, in some cases, andesite, in some cases, granite, they take a large block and they fit it into a corner. Now, if you and I are building an edifice with large blocks and we're going to create a corner joint, we're going to either stagger the blocks, like we do with bricks, or we're going to butt the blocks up together to create a nice clean joint. But these builders, these cyclopean masons, they took the piece of stone and they literally curved it into the corner. They would curve the stone into the corner, which is much more, which is exceedingly more difficult. They do this at the temple in front of the Sphinx, just like they do it in the walls of Ollantaytambo. This is the fingerprint of a ubiquitous knowledge that somebody had a long time ago on planet Earth, because I don't believe that the megaliths in Peru were built by the Inca, and I don't believe that some of the oldest, like the Sphinx, archaeological edifices on the Giza Plateau, for example, were built by the Egyptians. I think we're looking at technology and knowledge that comes from the antediluvian world, the world before the flood.
He thinks that this happened before the flood. I mean, technically, if you want to look at the pyramids, they date back past the flood, I believe. So maybe there was some crazy technology, or the sons of God were at play. So he's gonna get into what exactly is going on with the book of Enoch and the sons of God. Who were the sons of God? Let's go.
I just want you to stick with this podcast, because this is such a wild journey, and it's going to go into places where you're like, that's crazy.
Yep.
But we end up at transhumanism and AI, and I think the Antichrist, or mark of the beast. And I don't know exactly what to think of all this, but I think it is so worth your time to listen and to just think this through. Okay, let's start now with, and all we're doing is building a foundation. And when you see when you see what he's built, and then we start really talking about what's happening today, it's going to come together, and you're going to be amazed. Let's start with the sons of God, and let me read this from Genesis. This is Genesis 6, 1 through 5. And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, the daughters were born unto them. And the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he is also flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. The same became mighty men, of which were of old, men of renown. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Okay. All right. We kind of know this story, but we always bypass the giants part. And the sons of God may be misinterpreted. Can you tell me your look at Genesis and why this is a foundational stone here?
Well, the first thing I would note is that you'll notice that no effort is made by the author of Genesis to elucidate the details of this peculiar digression in the Genesis narrative. It's just there. There's no explanation.
Exactly. This is because so many people are assuming that you already know who these giants are, these Nephilim creatures are. And he's going to dive into, I'll give him credit here, because 100% that the book of Enoch was very well known compared to what we can grasp or acknowledge during that time.
For it. And the reason for that is because the author presumes the reader's knowledge of this infamous affair. The story, therefore, must have been thoroughly chronicled elsewhere in the Hebraic scriptures and then widely disseminated, at least in oral tradition. So this is something that was known. The author of Genesis is making reference to this extraordinary event that is clearly very well known to the reader and documented elsewhere.
And what is the event? Because I had never heard this before. What is the event?
So the event is the sons of God. This term is B'nai Ha Elohim, and it never refers to human agents in the Old Testament. The term sons of God only and exclusively refers to angelic beings, to celestial beings. So we are right out of the gates here. We are not talking about human actors. And there's a theory called the sons of Seth theory, which posits that the sons of God were just the noble offspring of Adam.
Which doesn't make sense.
And it's ridiculous because this tradition is so well known in ancient Hebrew cosmology. It forms the substratum to so much of what we read in the Old and in the New Testament, this incident. So what we're looking at are non-human beings, celestial beings, the sons of God, angelic entities who are observing the earth, who are watching the earth. This is why probably they're called watchers in the book of Daniel and elsewhere. And they're lusting after the daughters of Adam. And so they descend to the earth. They take, as the book of Genesis says here in Genesis 6, they choose from among the daughters of men, maidens that they ultimately wed, and then they procreate with these women. And the result is a race of giants. They progenerate a race of giants in the earth, and these giants are referred to
The Nephilim. It makes completely no sense to say that these sons of God were actually the lines of Seth, but somehow they produced giants. That's weird. I don't know how that happened, unless they're spiritual angelic beings.
biblical narrative as Nephilim. And that, so you have a problem if you think that these are human agents, just men, just normal human beings copulating with normal human women, normal human males with normal human women. How do you get giants as a result?
Exactly.
How do they procreate Nephilim? It's the equation doesn't
Okay, so
work.
wait, explain what Nephilim is, because the translation for Nephilim is fallen one, right?
Well, that's disputed. Nephilim is a giant. You can derive Nephilim from the Hebrew word nephal, which means to fall, but I think it comes from the Aramaic. I think that the late Dr. Michael Heiser had the right interpretation of the word Nephilim. It comes from the Aramaic, which is Nephilim, which means giants.
Shout out to Dr. Michael Heiser.
And in the Greek, in the Septuagint, these beings are referred to as gigantes, as giants. So when you read Nephilim,
and we're not talking about figurative giants. We're talking about actual giants, like what David fought.
Precisely, beings of gigantic stature. And in the antediluvian world, in the world before the flood, they were even larger than the post-flood giants, because they were in the world, and this is what Genesis says later, they were in the world both before the flood and after the flood, and obviously we know that they're in the world after the flood according to the biblical narrative. Joshua and the Hebrews are confronting these races of giants who are dispersed throughout Canaan, especially in the highlands. The Anakim, for example, who are the descendants of the Nephilim.
Chuck Missler, he thinks that all of the people that the Israelites had to face had some form of giants, and there were some descendant of the Nephilim. And God called Abraham to the promised land, but he's like, wait, we're going to give them 400 years, the Canaanites, 400 years to repent. But during that time, Chuck Missler says, that was enough time for the enemy to lay a minefield of these giants. Something to think about. And I always think, I'm like, well, that would justify a lot of the Israelites going and wiping out these certain groups if they were filled with the Nephilim genes or whatever you want to call it. But I don't know. It wouldn't make much sense though for God to give them a time to repent.
I mean, if I'm not mistaken, there were giants that were found here in America.
Yes.
Right?
Oh, yes. This is
Right.
known as
And
the
they were
Smithsonian
enormous.
Gate. It's the Smithsonian cover-up.
Right.
And there were the bones of giants being discovered all over America back from the mid-1800s back into the early 20th century, and primarily in the mounds, in the Indian mounds. You know, there were thousands and thousands of Indian mounds, east of the Mississippi. And many of these mounds, according to the Smithsonian's own records, many of these mounds contained anomalous artifacts, especially the bones of giants and gigantic axes and all manner of strange artifact. And in even what's remarkable is even Abraham Lincoln, while waxing poetically about Niagara Falls, makes reference to the bones of that ancient species of giants in the mounds.
Really?
And it was well known.
Okay.
I mean, this was not conspiratorial back in the mid-1800s.
So who are these beings, these sons of God? Because they go very dark. Are they like the fallen ones? Are they angels that have?
So really, in order to get insight into this Genesis 6 affair again, which is a bizarre digression in the Genesis narrative, again, because the author is presuming that his audience is well informed, and has been informed from some other kind of tradition. This story is expounded in the Book of Enoch, and in the Book of Enoch, it delineates.
Wait, before you go there, talk about the Book of Enoch, because up until we found the Dead Sea Scrolls, we only saw it in Ethiopia. Thought it was, the Ethiopians made it up 200 years, 200 years ago, whatever. We find the Dead Sea Scrolls, and we now know that the Book of Enoch is from the ancient times, but it's an apocrypha book.
Yes, it's pseudepigraphical. It's pseudepigraphical, meaning that it claims to be written by a biblical author, but the authorship is unknown.
Okay.
So the Book of Enoch was rediscovered in 1773 by the Scottish explorer James Bruce of Cunard. This, by the way, is a collateral relative. James Bruce of Cunard is a collateral relative of the illustrious Robert the Bruce, who led the Scots to victory in their War of Independence against the English in the early 14th century. Robert the Bruce was also, incidentally, a Freemason of the Scottish Rite. And I think he was looking for the Ark of the Covenant. So he went to Ethiopia, and he discovered in Ethiopia, he brought back to England a copy, because he brought two copies back to England. One he delivered to the King of France on his way home. Two copies of the Book of Enoch, the Ethiopic Book of Enoch, which is called First Enoch, and it's written in Ge'ez, which is the liturgical language of the Ethiopians. And it turns out that although the Book of Enoch had not been accepted into the canons of the canons of the Jews, the canon of the Jews rather, and the canon of the Christians, it had been inducted into the canons of the Beta Israel Jews and the Orthodox Tawahedo Christians in Ethiopia.
Really?
So the Book of Enoch disappeared. It all but disappeared from the world in around 500 AD, by about 500 AD. However, it was preserved in Ethiopia by both the Jews and the Christians who, as I said, had inducted it into their canons. So if you were a Christian growing up in Ethiopia, or a Jew, or an Orthodox Jew, Orthodox Christian, or Orthodox Jew, growing up in Ethiopia, you would have had the Book of Enoch, First Enoch, as part of your scriptures. It would have been considered.
Man, I just can't imagine reading the Book of Enoch in the Old Testament and thinking all of these things. But in my opinion, guys, Whether the book of Enoch is in the canon or not, it doesn't change the fact everything that we should believe about the supernatural realm in the Nephilim and the fallen ones, in my opinion. Because a lot of that stuff is still debated over. Like, what is exactly the book of Enoch mean? Could be this way, could be that way. But the supernatural realm, the sons of God coming down and coming on to the daughters of men, that is all within the Bible itself. And they're going to talk about Jude quoting the book of Enoch and all of that, which is fascinating.
So it was in 1773 that the book of Enoch became reintroduced into the corpus of extra biblical texts. And then we had, of course, R.H. Charles, who made a definitive English version back in 1912. And so the book of Enoch is referenced actually by many of the early church fathers, including Clement and Barnabas, friends of Paul, Irenaeus, Origen, Tertullian, Athenagoras of Athens, and Justin Martyr. And all of these, many of the church fathers held a favorable view of the book of Enoch, and some even referenced it as Holy Scripture. Now, I'm not here to argue that the book of Enoch should be in the canon. That question is actually quite irrelevant to me.
Right.
But it's very, very fascinating because, as I said earlier, you cannot separate, you cannot extract the Enochian tale from the biblical narrative. It is foundational. And it's not just foundational in the Old Testament. So Enoch begins just like in the book of Genesis. In fact, in the book of Enoch, you have ironically, in Enoch chapter 6, the first few verses, just like in Genesis, you have the passage from which the passage in Genesis is derived. It reads, "And it came to pass when the children of men had multiplied, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the angels, the children of heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose wives from among the children of men, and beget us children." That's where the story begins. So you have the angels of heaven looking down, lusting after the daughters of men. By the way, the designation angel, the angels of heaven, that's not just found in the book of Enoch. That's also found in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament that the disciples of Christ were using, that the apostles were using. In Genesis 6, it reads, the angels of heaven. And this is, of course, what...
And they don't mean it like we would mean angels, right? Because we think of angels as this, God-worshiping being. Angels don't fall. I mean, there were, a third of the angels fell, but we're not talking about the good angels.
Okay, so we're talking about in Enoch. Enoch designates these angels as watchers. And the watcher designation is not exclusive to extra biblical material.
First of all, angels just means messengers. But if there were some type of spiritual being, I get that.
Found in the book of Daniel. You'll recall that in the book of Daniel, there's this incredible scene in which Nebuchadnezzar is being judged by the holy watchers, by a council of holy watchers.
That's wild.
And they, of course, condemn him to several years of madness in which he had the mind of an animal and was eating grass and so forth. That was that was a sentence that came down from the watchers. And so this is clearly hierarchical. These are hierarchical terms. The watchers are some exalted, probably members of the divine council. And they, in the book of Enoch, are lusting after the daughters of men. They decide. There's 200 of them, by the way, that are designated in the book of Enoch.
Wow.
They decide to descend to the earth, to the summit of Mount Hermon. They take there an oath. They bind themselves by mutual imprecations. By the way, Mount Hermon has since time immemorial been called the mountain of oath. And then the watchers, these 200 watchers, descend into the plains, and they begin to select.
What is the oath they take?
I'm sorry?
What is the oath that they take?
The oath that they take is that basically we're all in this together, and we know that this is a grave sin, that this is what we're about to do is a grave transgression against the King of heaven. And so we're all in this together, and we are all going to suffer the consequences equally, share in the consequences, whatever befall. That is a summation of the oath. So they know what they're about to do is a grave transgression. And of course, what they do is what's alluded in Genesis. They take wives, they procreate with these women, and progenerate a race of hybrid giants. And then
I want to point out something really crazy. I believe to the same mountain Jesus takes his disciples, and that's where he calls Peter, actually Peter. He calls Simon Peter the rock. We're going to read that at the end here in a little bit.
They impart to mankind forbidden knowledge from heaven, and mankind is corrupted through this knowledge. And the giants that are born of the Watchers, these are hybrid beings, part Watcher, part human. They begin to devour men. They begin to devour mankind. In fact, the Book of Watchers says that men were forced to feed the giants, but the giants were devouring all of the acquisitions of the land. Their appetites were so enormous that men couldn't keep them satiated.
Wow.
And so the giants began to devour men, and then men began to cry out to petition heaven, and then God resolves to intervene. And through a series of judgments, he judges the Watchers and their hybrid offspring, and then the flood ensues. That's an encapsulation of the story that's presented in First Enoch.
Wow. That is amazing. I was right. And the specific mountain is not named in the Bible, but Christian tradition has identified Mount Tabor as the site of Jesus' transfiguration. Another possibility is Mount Hermon, which some scholars favor due to the heights and proximity to Caesarea Philippi, where the events leading up to the transfiguration took place. That's crazy. So that's interesting. I'd love to know what you guys think in the comments below. This is super fascinating stuff. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. I encourage you to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't. I'm going to have an entire video in the description below you that you can check out. Anyway, guys, have an amazing day and God bless.